David's unusually broad interests in philosophy. Some of his interests include aesthetics, ethics, political philosophy, philosophy of mind, philosophy of language, Kant, Nietzsche, and 19th century philosophy, the history of analytic philosophy. And to mention just a few of his areas of specialization and interest. And at the moment, he's working on a big book monograph on metaphor. Although David's got famously broad interest in philosophy, I think it's fair to say you also have a great reputation in the field for having a very deep understanding of many different areas. I have a nice memory, actually, of being at Stanford just before the lockdown of the pandemic, and David Essen was invited to workshop his work, and I remember you gave these very sort of penetrating comments that explored all sort of interesting interconnections between rules as well. It's a great pleasure to welcome you, and David's talk this afternoon will be on Kant's critique of taste. It'll be for an hour, then we'll take our customary break, and then we'll move into the Q&A. So thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.
It's a special treat to accomplishment. Some of the reasons are ones I'm tempted to count. So. Thank you so much. In section 9 of the Analytic, beautiful Kant poses a question whose answer is clear to me. If he is a critique of taste and is worthy of full attention, this declaration has attracted the full attention of various reports for readers of the years. Yet there's no consensus as to which answer Kant intends to endorse, let alone how this answer properly understood serves to unlock the mysteries of taste. On the account I defend, Kant argues that I can have a disinterested pleasure only by successfully setting out to have a pleasure the likes of which I can properly acquire from fellow spectators. When it comes to pleasures, a cultivated impersonality is the price of detachment, the price of freedom. But this is part of an extended exegetical experiment in which I attempt to connect certain dots left unconnected in the text of the third critique as it stands. It strikes me that when he set out to write the 4 moments that constitute the Analytic beautiful, Kant planned to offer a sustained connected argument relating commonsensically acknowledged features of taste and its pleasures to the possibility of human theoretical input by making ambitious use of newly minted accounts of what desire, cognition, and pleasure are in the first place. And the contention that there are 3 and only 3 fundamental forms of pleasure: pleasure in the agreeable, pleasure in the beautiful, and pleasure in the morally and instrumentally good. And that taken together with their corresponding displeasures, they exhaust the realm of human feeling. But what we get in the text are only certain portions of such an argument, often perhaps characteristically the hardest bits. Anyway, that's the suggestion I'm trying to play through. Now, there's a little poem of Wallace Stevens that Stevens himself that Kant called Table Talk. Granted, we die for good. Life then is largely a thing that happens to us, not should. And that too, granted, why do I happen to like red bush, gray grass, and green-gray sky? What else remains? But red, gray, green, why those of all? That's not what I said. Not those of all, but those. One likes what one happens to like. One likes the way red grows. It cannot matter at all. Happens to like is one of the ways things happen to fall. Beauty has something to do with contemplative pleasure. When we contemplate certain objects that please us, they elicit a response from us that's been variously described as pleasure, delight, satisfaction, approval, favor, liking. Not all contemplative pleasures have anything to do with beauty, but when it strikes us that a pleasure or liking of ours is just the right sort, and an object elicits it in just the right way, we speak not just of a pleasant contemplative encounter, but of a beautiful object. For Stevens, beauty is a matter of what one really happens to like in a twofold sense. On the one hand, the particular objects that please us in the relevant way aren't destined to do so by any deep, mysterious mechanism kicking away at the heart of things. ability to please is entirely accidental, in no way necessary. One of the ways things happen to fall. On the other hand, there is no sense in which these objects deserve or demand or require this sort of control. It is a thing of happens to that, not should. For Kant, on the other hand, a strange kind of necessity and a strange kind of obligation characterize our collective objects. Far from being an accidental power to these particular individuals, beauty is a matter of what all of us necessarily can like. And when we all can like objects in this world, there's a sense in which we all should like. We won't do full justice to the objects or ourselves if we fail to. The necessity here is strange, in that we can't be bought to appreciate it by acknowledging the force of appropriate reasons or arguments. Strange in Kant's eyes, because that's the way necessity goes. If an object is beautiful, the contemplation of its necessarily for everyone. Yet given an object that's in fact beautiful, no argument can be made, no reasons can be offered that would compel any reasonable person to conclude that the contemplation of its pleasure, whether for good in general. The obligation involved is also strange. It's hard to see what would be amiss if I didn't respond. But the landscapes, feelings won't be hurt, its day won't be ruined if my response to it. Justice and take the light where you may, might or might not be good advice, but it's not imperative. It's hard to see what the practical force of action is supposed to be anyway, since whether I take pleasure in contemplating given objects can seem utterly out of my control. Exploration of these mysteries is performed by two regular principles. The first concerns the relation between human ends and natural purposes of functions. No doubt Kant believed that from the perspective of the individual spectator, pleasurable experience of an object's beauty is its own reward, something needing no downstream effects to make it worth having. But this didn't stop him from seeking and finding functions for beauty, the pleasure we take in it, and our susceptibility to such pleasure in a broader economy of human needs and satisfactions. It didn't stop him from thinking that beauty and susceptibility to pleasure in its presence is to be prized for its own sake by human individuals, precisely because it would be prized for the sake of its effects by a providential divine intelligence with conditions of human intelligence. Good. Like consciously before him, Kant located the function of our human susceptibility to pleasure in its power to motivate human directions. But from the perspective of the one experiencing it, pleasure in an object's beauty is valuable in itself and the story. From the perspective of nature, providence, hypothetical designing intelligence, a pleasure in an object's beauty is in cognition service. Some representative quotes from later on in the book. Beautiful objects don't deplete, but instead renew, don't tire, but instead invigorate. On the one hand, attention to such an object renews itself, keeps itself renewed in an open-ended manner, rather than shutting itself down when some crucial act is completed or some crucial insight achieved. Later on, after our attention to such an object is broken off for whatever reason, our encounter with it proves to have effect. We return to the more general business of understanding and coping with the world around us in a renewed and invigorated state, thanks not to the completion of some decisive act, to the achievement of some decisive insight, but to the way appropriate attention to a beautiful object is reshaped and rescheduled with our attention to the world at large, putting that attention on a more fruitful or hopeful course, with the result that we ourselves are invigorated. My second regular principle concerns this special subjective universality Kant describes. Kant claims in the first moment that beauty judgments of taste, have a purely subjective and personal determining ground. A beauty judgment issued by me should be the direct candid expression of a pleasure I actually personally take in contemplating an object. Yet he adds in the second moment Section 7, that in issuing such a judgment, I expect others to feel as I feel and accordingly judge as I judge. He quickly explains that the expectation he speaks of is a matter not of what I confidently foresee from others, but of what I somehow require of them. Combination of a narrowly subjective and personal basis and sweeping interpersonal normative tensions is something Kant wants to understand and wants to indicate. I can now state my second predicate principle. Statistics on the autonomy of taste meaning for I state a spectator taste judgments includes ongoing reliance on the taste of others in the cultivation and exercise of his own. Famous remarks from the peculiarities of the judgment of taste come to mind in this connection. When it comes to taste judgments issued by others that conflict in some way with our own, if someone does not find a building, a view, or a poem beautiful, then he does not allow approval of it to be internally imposed upon himself by 100 voices with all praise of highly. Easy to hear in this, the romanticism of, say, Emerson, self-reliance. Trust thyself, every heart vibrates to that iron string. Society everywhere is in conspiracy against the mandate of every one of its members. More to the same effect. When it comes to conflicting rules of taste, certain passages, which are the very ones that displeased me, may agree with the rules of beauty as they've been given and universally recognized. Nevertheless, I will stop up my ears, listen to reasons and arguments, and would rather believe that those rules of the critics are false than allow that my judgment should be determined by impartial grounds of proof. Easily here in this, the modernism of, say, Heisenberg. There is not in all the world's criticism a single purely descriptive statement concerning which one is prepared to say, if it is true, I shall write that. Kant may have enabled Emerson and Heisenberg to do such things later on. He may even have given them permission to think them, but I don't suspect for a moment that he thought them himself. When it comes to Emerson, the sturdily self-reliant spectator left cold by an object of his praise to the skies, Kant says, just the end of this, the judgment of others when it's unfavorable to our own can of course rightly give us reservations, can of course rightly give us reservations, but can never convince us of its incorrectness. There is no empirical ground proof of forcing the judgment on anyone, but notice dissent from others is never enough to warrant or fund a contrary taste judgment, but it can suffice to make one reasonably mistrustful of one's own taste. And the judgments of others aren't just grounds for self-mistrust, they can be sources of reasonable self-confidence as well. In this respect, taste works just the way other a priori disciplines work, like mathematics. In any case, the idea of stopping up one's ears against judgments and rules offered by others needs to be handled with great care if this makes sense. When I offer a properly issued judgment of taste, I expect, require, or demand the agreement of others, but it is hard to see how such an expectation or requirement or demand could amount to much unless those to whom I address it can properly listen to it and properly take it into account. Our interpretation of taste and its claims shouldn't commit us to the absurd spectacle of speakers bellowing ever more loudly into each other's ever more firmly stopped up views. That's a hard way to do this. I'm proven, so I'm sorry. I think a bit about the case for postulates. In submitting to calculus, we must presume ourselves free, capable of autonomous ruling. In submitting to it wholeheartedly, we must commit ourselves without reserve but involving the virtue of all rational agents, the happiness of all rational agents. First, we commit ourselves without reserve to the pursuit of the state of jurisprudence. Limit. To do that, we must presume whatever it takes to render its capability unlimited. That includes an afterlife to make unlimited progress in the attainment of what is possible, in God to render attaining happiness appropriate virtue. So God, freedom, and immortality are postulates, presumptions in front of the reason. In endeavoring to act morally, I endeavor to act in the light of the thought. True, to act in denying these and to fail to make the most of my capacities and right. Yet nothing that happens in the knowable sense of the world constitutes evidence for against their truth. They constitute conventionality. Things that happen to me can make them harder, easier or harder to sustain, make it easier or harder to I want to suggest that in the theoretical side of it, we find ourselves with another fast about constructing a hierarchical system of empirical natural kinds, each governed by a set of empirical natural laws. When we're trying to answer a determinate yes or no question already posed, trying to decide whether to assume a given particular universal and judgment, we're called on to exercises in that sense. Yes or no answer the question. Inquiry and is difficult. But when this isn't the case, when we must go hunting for the appropriate universal, our explorations of available empirical possibilities must be directly coordinated, shaped, and scheduled, if you like, in a rationally appropriate, intelligent manner, if they have any hope of long-term cumulative success. So here again, there's an unverifiable but indispensable presumption on which we must act. A postulate of theoretical reasoning, if you like, but it's linked on the principle of natural precociveness. Here's our states of introduction that help to keep it before us in the language. So far as its contingent array of kinds and laws is concerned, nature is designated to the measure of our cognitive powers by some suitably powerful ranging intelligence committed to our long-term success of making sense of nature. Now, at the point, it's easy to see how presuming TNP's truth label might shape and schedule the precedent for results to give it a chance of delivering success. It calls on us to consider first empirical possibilities. It's usually easy. Proceeding to harder and less attractive fields. To channel our efforts in our research response. Our efforts need to be channeled. Get on with this in the long run. Here again, we've got principles necessary to presume what it is. Falsify, to deny it or fail to act on its supposed truth is to fail to make the most of it. If nothing we observe counts as evidence for or against the world's having been made, or being internally as if it had been made, in a manner so friendly to our long-term cognitive aspirations. Kant is no friend side. Experiences that make the presumption that the world is as if made to our nature easier or harder to sustain aren't evidence for or against its literal truth, even if we could determinately spell out what its literal truth consists of. reliance on PMP isn't confined to the grander and more ambitious reaches of natural scientific theorizing. It's at work already in the formation of the most modest, everyday empirical concepts. Only with its help can we develop the shared stock of concepts on which the simplest forms of shared inquiry depends. Now, commitment to PNP manifests itself differently in different areas. It manifests itself in large-scale management, empirical inquiry, and so-called maxims of the power of judgment we talk about. In the objective aspect of what cognition organized means, it manifests itself in the description as its purpose means power. In the subjective aspect of our representation, the method manifests itself in the judgments of taste. The aesthetic representation purposiveness of nature through their power to ordinate. But in making an ordinary empirical judgment, I'm just to claim or declare that everyone else cognizes I cognize to the extent required in order to judge as I judge. At one point, you compare and contrast this requirement with the implicit judgments of taste to the effect that everyone else feel as I feel. Yeah, there's a water droplet in food. Of course, you don't see the water droplet. What you see is the air bubble that occupies the rest of the hollow space. So the subjective experience perception. An individual judgment of experience, when made by someone who perceives a mobile droplet of water in a rock crystal, rightly demands that everyone else was kind also find it. So since it made this judgment in accordance with the general conditions of the determining power of judgment under the laws of the possibilities in general. In just the same way, someone who feels pleasure in the mere reflection of the form of an object without regard to the concept rightly makes it in the assent of everyone else, since the ground for this pleasure can be found in the universal subjective condition of judgments, namely the proposed so is required. Both judgments of experience and judgments of taste are universal, immutable, but in different ways. The droplet judgment is universal. General conditions that determine the power of judgment. My judgment that the crystal contains a water droplet is correct only if certain representations belong together in the object, whatever the state of the subject may be. And the same goes for your judgment, the same fact. In judging the object as I do, I indirectly require your judgment to do. Since it's a norm set by the object itself, the original judgment subject. The beauty judgment, by contrast, is universally communicable thanks to the universal subjective condition of reflecting. Here again, here there's no norm for judging the external judgments each of us is supposed to make, thanks to the pleasures each of us is supposed to feel. And my requiring you to feel as I feel and judge as I judge involves a direct personal authority for my pleasures over yours, an authority bound up with a claim on my part, however funded, that have sufficiently good taste in the way there. Despite these differences, conflicts on the PMP helps to make possible the objective universal communicability. Precisely by making taste, how might that be thought? Well, if there were a special class of pleasures whose function is to reinvigorate and give concrete direction to our can start to see why they need to exhibit the subjective universal communicability of appropriate pleasures in the beautiful. To presume that nature is as if made to measure our powers is to presume that your cognitive powers are made to measure mine, and vice versa. And insofar as inquiries long-term collaborative, aspiring results to be objective universal communicability of finished cognitions. Pleasure is coordinate us with one another if they're to remove and regulate and give appropriate shared direction for our efforts. They will search to attract a critical mass of attention from different inquirers to the same concepts, hypotheses, development, and then serve to render sufficient similar enough propensity merely reflecting judges, so that some of us can and will pick up where others involved as important. Next, Kant seems to be proposing that pleasures for the special function in inquiry just are pleasures in the beauty of things. And such pleasures are universally communicable because they need to be if they're removed, individuated, and coordinated. The ability to take pleasure in beautiful objects and express it in judgments of taste is said to be requisite for empirical cognition in general, not just empirical cognition of particular objects correctly. Beautiful. But not all objects are beautiful. And the exercise of taste is no small part of the Kant therefore seems to be telling us that to make objective empirical judgments about anything, we must find something. First, the experience of particular objects found to be beautiful that removes, invigorates, and coordinates attention to objects in general. We therefore encourage to view beautiful objects possessing a diffuse heuristic power, a generalized, unfocused, theoretical suggestiveness, so that when we contemplate them in the manner their form serves to elicit reward, the cognitive faculties are entertained, invigorated, energy and direction is given to our movement to PNP with the result of the general sense of the natural order. We find ourselves with renewed energy and sharp sense of direction. A beautiful object is mixed traditions, all à penser, in something like Levi Strauss's sense, good to think about because good to think with. These are two rather cryptic announcements of a movement discipline, sometimes calls it transcendental way of understanding monster basic powers, desire, all three powers construct and deploy representations of objects, objects we desire, to which we are averse, objects with which we are satisfied and dissatisfied, objects we prefer to no. They are distinct powers, nevertheless. Kant firmly rejects rationalist conceptions on which desire is a confused apprehension of things with perfection. Desire for or aversion desire for or aversion to the whole, pleasure or displeasure in it, cognition of it, all these are complex representation states in which all is represented. But this is all there is in the mind for states of mind to be consistent. What makes certain particular representations the same representation effect, desires or pleasures or cognitions, is what they are as if for in such psychology or how they're used and sustained, distinguished by function and distinct powers. So it's the powers of work rather than the structural product. instance, that each power has its own proprietary set of representation space with its own proprietary ingredients. Rationalism is one of Kant's targets. Of course, another is the Lockean empiricist humanism, in which all desire is for pleasure, all pain to pain, and pleasures and pains of simplicity. If in theoretical cognition, though I represent those after the fact, and so we're getting to it, then in desire for it, I desire can be unconscious, blind, since it can represent that. Pleasures, satisfactions are representation states in the business of keeping themselves, maintaining themselves for their own possibility of time. Often the process of self-management, self-defining self, a pleasure you can be all desires in principle be a temporal, conscious pleasures may be utilized. For self-maintenance involves persisting over time, and pleasures work to maintain themselves by providing motive rationale for their own persistence in the form of a conscious and felt favorability to life, a felt favorability. So, a pleasure affords us an inarticulate sense, often inaccurate, then in letting it persist to participate in this persistence will enhance it, and in the sense moves us to let the pleasure persist, participate in this persistence. Pleasures of motivation and self-maintaining thanks to their conscious character, how it feels to be in them, and to have a conscious character, a state must be a conscious state, whether or not it belongs to a self-conscious state. Pleasures are as if they're no vital powers that felt the favor and to do this effectively when it's been shaped and scheduled, managed, if you will, by those same vital powers. There are three basic cases. Pleasure being agreeable, with its felt favorability and morality, and satisfaction of needs. Pleasure is morally good, with its felt favorability, human practical rationality, and pleasure in the beautiful, with its felt favorability to human cognition in general. Pleasure in the good is distinct from ways that sort of minute. It's as if here to facilitate the formation and satisfaction of rational volitions by shaping and scheduling and changing. So the less we can do or need to do with or about it, the things goodness we accomplish, the less prone we should be to taking pleasure in this goodness by paying it the kind of self-limiting self. So, although judgments of goodness, objective, universally communicable judgments, pleasures in goodness aren't universally communicable at all. Rejects the empiricist mode of just value in its goodness, and especially excited feeling pleasure of passion. Value in its goodness is not a volition, it's a matter of desire, pleasure, meaning. And pleasure in things more than its mental goodness is always occasionally informed, shaped, and scheduled by determining conceptual specification of what's good about it, what makes it count as good in the first place, so the good pleases or satisfies with a concept as the applicability concept deemed good, but as the determining ground of both our finding it good in the first place and our pleasure in its goodness. Let's do a brief look at my chest. The other second one, The moment explicitly concerned with subjective universal communicability, Kant suddenly poses the key question: whether in the judgment case the feeling of pleasure precedes the judging, or the latter precedes the feeling. He says the solution to this problem is the key of attention. Now, it's already a bit of a surprise to see the question getting posed at this stage. We're told at the beginning of the first moment that a judgment of taste is an aesthetic judgment, reached by referring our representation of love solely to ourselves and our susceptibility to pleasure and displeasure, hence not at all to the object itself, with an eye to discerning information. It would appear to follow that a judgment of taste must be some sort of direct expression of the pleasure already felt, an impression richly confirmed by later discussions of taste merely subjective to ground. It would therefore appear that Kant has already delivered the official pleasure. Our surprise is deepened when he proceeds to argue by some kind of reductio of the opposing judging. Surprise turns into bafflement as we struggle to state and assess the particular reductio Kant has in mind. And bafflement turns into exasperation as we work to find some specific word this key is expected. There have been two connected and ingenious efforts to sort all of this out for us, one by Kant, Paul Geyer, and the other by Hans Ginsburg. Opening with admiring they're informed by very different overall models. Work. And today I'm going to be critical of this. When Geyer said he worked on the third feedback in the 70s, it was widespread sense to me aesthetics community that constantly was both deeper and more obscure than anything assessments of a human. Geyer's scholarship articulates and vindicates that sense of and Geyer is very skeptical. And he would want me to start this here. Geyer reads him. The two-act model. First, direct reflection on a simple estimation of the object involving some kind of suggestion. What may happen next if the object is immediate state of free play of our free play of harmonious free play of faculties set up by the object that in turn causes pleasure use. Having this sort of causes what makes it pleasure. What may happen after that is a second self-scrutinizing. I ask myself what pleasure I found after that possible desires of mine in ways that are interesting, and I ask myself what the grounds of my satisfaction with it purely involved in subjective principles. If and only if the answer to both questions is no, I may conclude that my pleasure is in the object's beauty rather than its goodness, that the object itself is beautiful, and that others can be true. So, the structure of this account might bring about. It closely parallels the proceduralist readings of the universal law formula of the categorical imperative that Kant also students with practice. According to those readings, the moral permissibility of acting on a given motive is established unilaterally and interpersonally without actually consulting the other parties. In fact, what we need is an arduous, fallible process of self-scrutiny designed to identify the motives behind the act and the maximum which are the actions. Simple, followed by the application of various formal tests to this maxim, is that the answer to these questions is no, I morally may act on them. So in the two-act model diatribe, there are two judgings, two acts of judgment, both of which Kant also calls acts of action. The first act directed at the object, culminating in pleasure, and the second directed at the subject herself, and reaching the conclusion that her pleasure is in the and others in production. Judgment case is this latter. As we understand, mind is various social beings. That will be a second justification turned by a prior judgment case, not a first. When he turns from exegesis to assessment, Dyer is quite critical about this. Kant is right to insist that human judgments combine a purely personal ground with a remarkable themes of pleasures, but his effort in the two acts model to show how we earn this authority by policing our pleasures for disinterested and subjective forms of propulsiveness is a failure of many different things. Turning the text of the key in particular, Dyer finds it a serious and impractical obstacle to getting clear over the two acts model itself. The key section, the mission of the key section is to complete Kant's statement of the two-act model by introducing a harmonious replay of actions, checking how it can count for the universal communicability of causes. He therefore should be insistent that a pleasure in beauty isn't a pleasure in any feature of my mental state, should be insisting that pleasure in beauty must precede the judgment of taste and be separated from it by appropriate efforts to student grounds. If we offer suitable glosses on Kant's abundant, profoundly equivalent talk of grounds and consequence, most of the key section can be relevant. But he admits to having fought with three particular senses. Skip the last one. Pretty much the first all of the back and forth. These are marked in the text of if the pleasure in the given object came first, and only its universal communicative ability could be attributed to the judgment of taste of the representation. Dyer says right away that they can appear to deny that we can make, can appear to deny that we can indeed make beauty judgments by having pleasures already felt, running on but appropriate. They seem to be denying that. Yet, he insists, we can also predict, and then with two-act this, that's saying merely that pleasure in beauty can never come, that pleasure in beauty can never literally come first, but must always be preceded by something else, namely an act of simple reflection, or simple estimation that brings an object. So That's his suggestion of bringing a line to that story. One might wonder how self-contradictory, false that you Diagrams pretty aging, simple estimation is quite well, Kierkegaard thinks we have to suppose that Kant just goes off the rails. B, and in particular, the part of it that I two takes the ability of some mental state or other to be a ground for rather than your constant self, which is all it is on the account. So there has to be some kind of lapse. Getting me to hang on thread. Here's Geiger's hypothesis about that. Universal communicability does help ground the judgment of taste proper. In that, it forms part of the content. And simple reflection or estimation refers to constant. Really does help ground pleasure and beautiful. In that it opens us to such pleasure in the first place. Well, momentarily forget we're talking about two distinct acts, judgment with different structures and purposes and so forth, architecture. And you'll have it that universal communicability helps to ground J. J helps to ground pleasure and beautiful. So, universal communicability helps to ground pleasure and beautiful by the transitivity that helps to ground. Well, I have nicer ways of putting this in the text. Talk about shooting yourself in the foot to be taken in by that transitivity argument in the heart of a passage that's designed to insist on the difference between these two acts of judgment. I've been philosophically confused a lot with this. In my experience, that isn't philosophical works. Anyway, this is similar to what was necessary. Dyer speculates that the futures who sees in the back to the earlier theory on which human responses to objects become pleasurable in the first place. Certainly, responses to objects become pleasurable for the first time, only when and only because we see them as readily shared with others, with the result that in society. I wonder is the third critique of the creation of this early or surprising that operation of it might remain true of the concept. Ginsburg's much more sanguine about concept of slow pace, giving taste and and her work on the third critique has a distinctive provenance of its own in controversies about rules, rule following, and normativity. Despite their unresolved differences, Wittgenstein and his readers make it abundantly clear, I think, that accepting and conforming to a norm can't always be a matter of consulting a definitively interpreted statement. But some of the peoples of the time certainly put norms must remain wholly or largely formula. Accepting them may consist of little more than having and endorsing various appropriate habits, and conforming may consist of little more than letting those habits have their way with us as a resulting part of the. In such cases, conduct comes under the sway of a complex state of mind that affirms its own existence. A state owing its endurance and efficacy in the lives of these part of himself. Now, Ginsburg was skeptical of Dyer's attribution of the two-act model, quite apart from his view itself, on grounds with which I've got some sympathy. She sees no evidence of appearing to take pleasure in objects being involved in constant. She sees no evidence of predecessor general capacity to test out pleasures for motives on the basis of scrutiny. Above all, she complains that the model turns the judgment of taste into an objective empirical judgment about the causes of reach only as the conclusion of the delicate causal inference about non-cycle workings. Others mustn't argue us into it. Yet we can and must argue ourselves into doing so. Dyer's the judgment of taste ceases to be an aesthetic judgment, issuing a special directness from the judgment. Now, Ginsburg thinks we can make connected sympathetic sense of the key if we break decisively the model. Putting in my interpretation, the judgment which precedes the pleasure is not the state from the judgment of taste. Rather, as a literal reading just there's only a single act of judgment required for the judgment of taste, one which is responsible both for the feeling of pleasure and for the feeling of value. Ginsburg is in effect taking our old friend A to declare that pleasure couldn't in fact be universal. Couldn't in fact be universally communicable. If it were affirmed to be universally communicable for the first time in some act of judgment. She proposes to take B the full face value by letting the universal communicability of our state of mind and contemplating the methodology explain and in that sense ground the pleasurability of that very state of mind. To make this work, we must suppose that a taste judgment system claim on the pleasures of others is already made by or already implicit in the relevant pleasure itself. Verbally pronouncing an object does nothing more than to express a claim on others, already issued by the pleasure one thereby expresses. To put it in terms Ginsburg herself doesn't use, in feeling such a pleasure at all, I already feel like it to be required for me to do it. If making such a claim on the pleasures of others suffices to issue a judgment of taste, a pleasure in beauty and a judgment of taste turned out to be a single state of mind described. Ginsburg draws on Kant's insistence that pleasures and representation states of mind that maintain themselves by affording sufficient motivation for existence. In the case of disinterested pleasure, pleasure and beauty is said to be disinterested in the first moment. Later, those grounds can't come from desires and objects satisfied. It's come instead from some sort of direct endorsement of pleasure terms. But for the garnering of endorsement to be a full-fledged means of systematic self-maintenance, the state garnering the endorsement and the state bestowing it need to be one and the same. So suppose I'm in a representation state that endorses itself not just as a state for me, but a state for all and sundry. The representation state that implicitly judges itself be universal. Instead of that, a representation state that simply universally self-endorses itself. Such a state is self-maintaining, hence presents itself to consciousness as pleasure because it's self-endorsing and thereby motivates its own motivation. And its expressed self-endorsement might succeed in effectively commending its life to one's fellow spectators, since all it asks of them is that they be in a representation state. It's universally meaningful as far as it goes, since the state has no further state. And the content of such judgment is always unobjectionable as far as it goes, hence, perhaps always deserving of the endorsement it garners. When laid out compactly, the model of judgment takes in for attributes a startlingly self-referential structure. The pleasure is at the same time an act of judging valid and the act of judging one's feeling, the act of judging one's state of mind to be universally valid presents itself as a pleasure. In virtue of its maintaining itself by self-endorsement. Such a self-referential state of mind isn't a cognition of the object that represents the judge's only itself, not the representation. Yet while judgments of taste and objective interpretations both constitutively endorse their own existence, objective judgments specify ways the object is judged to be, hence ways the object is to be judged that go beyond judging the way I judge. Finding the object beautiful is an otherwise blank content of self-interest state of mind, the further elaboration of which is needed before the objective and general. This is what felt favorability to college comes to. We're dealing with a maximally simple self-endorsement state of mind within which one places which more elaborate objection and content of self. This is very ingenious and resourceful thinking is an exercise from which I continue things. Yet Ginsburg seems hard pressed to avoid the conclusion that the concept into history. The thought that beautiful objects are special kinds of things that likely facilitate the cognition of things in general seems to be the place. Self-endorsement is an effective form of self-maintenance anyway. As we can see from the case of if I judge the simplest case, I can't endorse judging the same issue otherwise, but that doesn't mean I endorse continually judging as I hear from now. Some true judgments best forgotten as soon as they're made. In recent work, Ginsburg emphasizes the advantage of the activities when it comes to taking the subjectivity of judgments seriously, resisting the assimilation of pleasures to simplify sensations and judgments of taste, secondary quality judgments, varying detachability of pleasures, effectively seen proceeding of thought that is beauty or self. Estheticians like many others endorse these abstract themselves and particular Kant scholars like Kant, people wish Kant thought was the first movement. Yet her respect for subject becomes the cause of soul distortion as Kant text. Brings back on this most natural place of time, but others feel as I feel, and according to judge as I judge. Ginsburg, however, is the self-referential, self-confirming content of the pleasure judgment that counts for its abilities rather than the other way around. Others are to judge as I judge, according to as I feel. Listen. And the pleasure taken expresses itself. As far as the interpretation of the key itself is concerned, Ginsburg's kind of proves desires, but it strikes me that it still gives Kant half of what it professes to do. In Geyer's eyes, pleasure and judgment are one and the same, and there is no other thing in judging that might literally precede the pleasure. He therefore continues to struggle with say, insofar as it appears to require judging of some sort to precede that pleasure. The best she can do with that is say, this judgment is manifest in consciousness as a feeling of pleasure. It precedes pleasure, not in a temporal causal sense, but in the sense of virtue. It's from its characters and active judgment that it derives its characters of pleasure from the ground, but is supposed to follow groundlessness. Yet the verb Kant uses to introduce indicate the need for a judgment to precede or follow pleasure. Vorher again, powerfully suggests real temporal coming before. Something observing the need judging seems to be needed to make pleasure and beautiful possibility and needs to happen first. Inwards equation, feeling, pleasure, finding, taste makes this feeling and finding in the case of aesthetic beauty judgments. We must do the same in the case of can take place without the required judging. It's prior judging, it's distinctive to pleasure and beauty. One last thing. Calling the universe and communicability a graph of pleasure imply that efforts to explain our susceptibility to pleasure and beauty bottom out in considerations. We might instead go on to identify some further feature of the state of mind fit to account for and thereby ground its universal communicability. Might this be what Kant is doing when he moves on in the text and talk about universal communicability? I propose now to back up and get a running start by asking how Kant's trichotomizing views about basic powers of mind and basic forms of pleasure. Estheticians in the tradition prior to Kant tend to insist that pleasure be taken in some sense disinterested, conspicuous exceptions. But there are counts of disinterestedness. First, sometimes pleasure is disinterested if it isn't connected with an impulse to consume or otherwise monopolize. Sometimes it's disinterested if it doesn't grow out of or produce any attachment. It's tempting and pretty standard nowadays to suppose that pleasure is disinterested in concept. It's just in case it does not depend on the subject's having a desire for the object, nor does it generate such a desire. But I think that's exegetically problematic for these two reasons. On the one hand, Kant maintains in the first moment the pleasure we take in beauty as our only disinterested pleasure. He'll go on to argue on the second moment that this pleasure is universally communicable and so that terms. Yet the pleasures of playful activities engaged in mere pastimes don't depend on enabling desires already in place and then desires behind. Theory that's just stated, yet such pleasures certainly aren't available in terms. Go all the way for gravity, nor should we. And they intuitively are pleasures and beauty. They should still do this. On the other hand, Kant will argue later on that in the presence of social aspects and moral concerns, we have every reason to cultivate the pleasure we take in beautiful objects will tend to spawn desires for and attachments to the real existence via motivational mechanisms, such as the upshot of this fascinating discussions of empirical and intellectual such. Very, very rich and tremendous material. More hopeful clause, disinterested, can be extracted from the discussion in section 2. If someone asks me whether I find the palace I see before me, I may well say I don't like that sort of thing. Maybe merely to negate that, like the Iroquois sieging, that nothing in Paris pleased me better than cook shops. In true Rousseau-esque style, I might even vilify the vanity of the great and waste the sweat of the people, such superfluous things. Finally, I could even easily convince myself that if I were to find myself on an uninhabited island without any hope of ever coming upon human beings again, and could conjure up such a magnificent structure for my mere wish, I would not even take the trouble of doing so if I already had a hut that was comfortable. All of this might be conceded to be an improvement. So what is an issue? One only wants to know whether the mere representation of the object is a good thing, satisfaction, however indifferent I might be with regard to the existence of the object. Now, there are hints here of the thought that beauty does transcend society, and society disappears at that. Something which we must return. But the main point of the passage is whether or not they in fact do so. The Iroquois and the Rousseauists could feel as we feel and judge as we judge regarding the beautiful palace without relinquishing the Iroquois' rooted indifference or the Rousseauists' rooted hostility. So we can intelligently require them to do so, not without attempting to dislodge their intent. That's just because taking it is compatible with settled indifference or settled hostility. Runs its availability as a source of perceptual states. All of the pleasures. Disinterested pleasures in mere representation. In sense suggested by that context. Once that was in place, Kant can argue that pleasures in the agreeable but are invariably interested rather than disinterested. A pleasure in the agreeable is that they provide singular objects availability to some contingent animal need, and thereby spawn an animal inclination, certain sort of desire for sensible eventually serve their basic purposes as pleasures. Only by collaborating with the power of desire and bringing into existence each of things or sorts of things in the state that makes them interesting pleasures in such justice. Only pleasure is beautiful in itself and eventually fulfill itself, i.e., perform the function as if they are to perform in their representation. Without collaborating desire and production, changes outside of one's own present and future representation space. This I suggest as well. Disinterested should not conflict. What fulfills the pleasure itself, what enables it to perform its function, might leave the person who feels it thwarted and frustrated, unfulfilled, and unfulfilled. For Kant, at any rate, the disinterestedness of the pleasure in no way entails the absence of temporary suspension of desires is the object of the person feeling it, nor does it keep disinterested pleasure from important desires going forward. Kant is often a great deal as severing the ties between erotic longings so that ranges as dissociating beauty from desire by conceiving beauty as the object of some impossibly sterile immaculate perception. Now, back to the first moment effectively defines pleasure and beauty as disinterested pleasure. The second redefines it as universally communicable pleasure concept. Both definitions have roots in everyday precepts, so cultivation, but if their path must be definitions of the beautiful, Kant must show their equivalence. If I'm right in thinking that pleasures is good, I'm never universally communicable. You can simplify this for present purposes using that concept. Pleasure is disinterested just in case it's universally communicable. Attached just in case it's impersonal. That impersonal pleasures are so active disinterested attached is easily done. Pleasures in the agreeable subject of appropriate variation from person to person and time to time due to the natural variability. Pleasures in the morally instrument of are subject to such variation in the role that called on sustaining and fulfilling situation-specific aspirations. Acknowledgements of goodness are often utterly devoid of pleasure in it, despite assertion. What's harder to make out is why disinterested pleasures are written back to the community. Kant's attempt to address this in the sixth, that's what it is why would you like to disinterested pleasure feels himself completely free with regard to the satisfaction it evokes to the objects of discovering private condition became subject alone, which the pleasure depends on takes himself to be else. Well, why should the only private conditions be different susceptible to pleasure rooted in different needs, ends, and opportunities, and one should also private conditions accessible to those subject to. But if one allows that a pleasure capable of fulfilling itself in mere representation needs to involve felt favorability to cognition in general, and this must therefore be shaped and scheduled by cognition in general. Kant has promising things to say here. But it's tightening up to me. He's already said that. Presume that nature is as nature measurable, according to powers, and insofar as includes the long-term collaborative affair, aspiring to results with objective cognitions, these pleasures must coordinate us with each other is there to give a direction to their efforts. They're universally communicable because they need to be communicable. I could have made this argument right at the beginning of the second point, perhaps you should have done that. As things stand, he delays explicit mention of cognition and cognitive aims.
We're running over a bit.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay, yeah. Return to I argue with Geyer against Ginsburg that part of what I'm saying is the pleasure of possible gene, since a pleasure felt without such an be a pleasure. Pleasure could be some distinctive objective determination features. Complaining Geyer can't say very much about that insult by self-contradictory. About it, and I've argued with Ginsburg and against Geyer that Kant is universal. Can't be after the pleasure universal must instead be viewed as driving forward, insisting on and actually achieving its own universal communicability as soon as it's communicable. I don't see how Ginsburg. Now, there's a curious thing about this sentence, where it actually appears the word only more seems to do no intelligible effect. If it's impossible to discover universal communicability only, it's trivially impossible to discover universal communicability plus further features. What if the word only is what is kind of meant in the judgment of taste if the pleasure is not if this universal communicability were to be a true representation of the object only in the judgment of transaction. At this point, we can achieve here. What I say. Segments A, B, C, suppose I find myself feeling pleasure in an object without regulating the shape and scheduling this pleasure from the outset by means of determining but suppose further that I propose to leave the universal communicability of pleasure open or unsettled for the time being, something to be determined later, only later by after the fact investigation of something. In that case, I must let the teacher take its course, declining to use any of my distinctive mental powers to manage my passive susceptibilities. Pleasure. But if I do that, let nature take its course, I leave the management of my pleasures maintenance to any roots and urges, in which case the aspect of my vital powers my pleasure looks to favor can be urge. My pleasure will therefore not be and pleasures in the agreeable are never universal. So in attempting to leave the question of universal communicability itself later, I'm settling in advance in the negative. Pleasure having the man just imagined can only be. This is the sense in which I can call it self-contradictory procedure. It's also that I can take pleasure only by actively setting out to take them, undertaking from the outset to deploy my passive susceptibilities and active intelligence only in ways I perfectly without people. The assumption of such a special impersonal visual stance at the outset is what makes pleasure possible in the first place. And that's the prior judgment. It's term of repudiation to recommend. B. Now we already know that a judgment takes force to be or express a state of fears rightly requires its life from anyone else. And we just now learned the state of mind. And we just now learned the state of mind owes its favorability to life, hence its pleasurability, at least in part, to a successful effort on my part to meet. See, universal communicability of the state of mind can't be objective universal communicability. Judgment, since the state of the mind is a pleasure relating to representation, so into the subject matter that is the object. And the only aspect of human vitality that concerns itself with the cultivation of universally communicable states of mind is cognition in general. So the state of mind with which we're concerned is the exercise of our general cognitive powers on behalf of our powers. Without the supervision of the truth, hence, characterize this exercise as a harmonious free play of imagination. It's really free in that it isn't regulated from the start by a particular concept and doesn't aim at the identification of the and free in the further sense that it isn't and so comes to this unfolds very Kant rejects Stevens' award of what we happen to can't matter without identifying its premise. Good. The pleasures we take or fail to take in beautiful objects, and what we make and fail to make, those pleasures are things that belong to the being. Harmonious free play turns out without a concept, it's not your ongoing supervision of the term. Or does it push toward a general specification of the forces and conditions of these objects? Please, it isn't itself a cognition of the object, but even in passing, my fresh discoveries concerning that object, since only to the subject is the object. It might nonetheless incorporate the terms of perceptions and judgments about the object that are already in hand, insofar as we can reason are the fellow perceivers. The free play looks to be some sort of open-ended agenda-free pondering of the object, content to leave our knowledge of it and about it pretty much as they stand, yet proceeding along lines calculated to make the most of the object as a stimulus to move going forward. I'm sorry about that. Message. The French poet Paul Valéry ends a little essay on his fascination with seashells with the following in the Kantian words. I shall throw away this thing that I have found as one pleasant little cigarette stuff. The seashell has served me, suggesting by turns what I am, what I know, what I do not. Just as Hamlet, picking up a skull in the rich earth and bringing it close to his living face, finds a gruesome image of himself, and enters upon meditation without issue, bounded on all sides by a circle of consternation. So beneath the human eye, this little, hollow, spiral-shaped, calcareous body summons up a number of thoughts, all inconclusive. Thanks.
Thank you very much. We'll take our customary 3-minute break, but try and be quick, please. Not 6 minutes. Okay, well, welcome back. We'll now move into Q&A. We have somewhat limited time, so I would encourage people to keep their questions as reasonably brief as possible, but we do have plenty of time. Yeah, so where do you answer? Yeah.
Okay. I wasn't sure.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you so much for the talk. I haven't done a lot of work on the critique, but I was really interested by your talk, and so I just a general question if I'm getting it somewhat right. So to me, it appeared that the explanation was we needed a way to instill purposiveness of nature into things and to motivate us to make judgments, disinterested judgments about our representations that were universal, that had to apply to everyone. Was that the point? Is that you need this pleasure into something that's a pleasure or that something's beautiful, but from nature's perspective, it was to force us all to make these judgments of the form of about representations that are universal, so that we instill this unity or purposiveness unity in nature. Because otherwise it wouldn't happen, because the nature is so serious, because our cognizing things shapes nature, I guess. That's my reading. Our cognition is constructing nature, right? Principally understanding or give us these universal necessary laws. So this is giving us particular empirical laws. Those don't come from our understanding. So we have to try and find those. Well, nature's trying to motivate us to make these universal judgments that have particular empirical unity. Is that in any way getting figures?
The issue about the kind of unity that is at stake in embrace of Kant is a little delicate, and the principles, I think, as far as I can tell, kind of independent of the sort of principle in the first critique that makes the mind a maker of nature. So there's supposed to be at least a sense in which nature can be thought of as their mind made in whatever way that the first critique says before these issues come up on the scene, but there's an important sense in which the cognition of nature remain fragmentary, still unless there are principal forces of shape schedule and coordinate so that these issues about merely reflective judgment on the terms of issues supposed to guide them with questions that Kant takes to be supplementary to those discussing. And the relation of the relation of disinterested other issues I'm exploring today, which I've been really focusing on the place of universal communicability. New definitions. And it's in universal communicability, but this circle of characterizations touches down most directly in information of the principle of natural closeness. But Kant takes the other characterizations have their own in part independent interest. I mean, although one put in principle, well, many of the arguments I was concerned with today without rearrange them so as to not look at disinterestedness first. I mean, disinterestedness is, first of all, another appearances in the earlier informal aesthetic theory that Kant used to say. Sense of catholic and Kant wants to add to that that there's an appealing sense in which satisfaction is the only free satisfaction. One that doesn't, as it were, remind us incessantly either bondage to our own animality or this slightly heroic way bondage to our own ration. So this is powerful and interesting.
Carrie? Oh.
Yeah, I am baffled, but I want to start with just maybe not simple, but so I see Hannah Ginsburg, and my understanding of her approach here is from your talk and her work in big conversation as trying to solve what looks to me like a big puzzle here is how there can be judgment in the absence of determinate constant. And as you know, her idea is that there's a notion of rightness, which is prior to and independent of bringing something under a concept. Yeah. And this seems like, well, it seems like an attractive way to go here, since Kant seems to be denying that there is a determinate concept. But it's puzzling for many of the reasons you say, and it doesn't seem to solve a lot of the textual problems. So let's assume you're right in critiques of that. That pushes us back into the side of how can there so much as be a judgment with no determinacy of concept? And how can it be a judgment of with the expectation that others would agree to it, but actually a normative standard for judging in the absence of determinate concept? And so I wonder, maybe this is an invitation to think perhaps along the following lines. The free play talk, if there's sufficient disinterestedness, is something like, I'm not bringing it under any one of these particular concepts, but there's a whole constellation of them, any one of which would shed some light on what I find pleasurable about this object, but no one of which is the source, is the single source of my pleasure. And the reason I find this universalizable is precisely because I'm not invested in some personal desire to have it come out one way or another. It's all only just my application of cognition that is involved in the judgment. That's the best I can do. Because I mean, that still puts it in the ballpark of judgment because it's on the basis of the cognition, bringing it under one of these or any one of these at any time that I'm thinking of it as beautiful. But I'm not committing myself to there being a particular determinate concept in which I bring it. Is that something in the ballpark?
Yeah, I think that's all good. I mean, and it opens very effectively on dimensions of this kind that I'm very interested in, and that wouldn't fit in a talk that focused as narrowly on the first and second elements of this one. Looking here and looking, I hope in the way I tried to sketch the Wittgenstein connection is that kind of leads down the road here and the primary place, primary immediate place, he does it. Fourth moment, deduction test is tell a story that fits with his own earlier commitments about formulation in the first critique. Make sense of the idea of obeying a rule. Obey a rule you can't formulate by coming to embody it in your taste. I mean, that's just a teaser, but that's part of the direction in which I want to pursue this. We'll go on to discuss the role of common sense and concrete picture of taste cultivation and the way in which you earn the right to speak in the special spirit by cultivating your own taste. It takes a certain amount of earned confidence in your own taste to actually make the claim of taste.
Yeah.
On this kind of understanding and my grappling with the features of practice has been a major influence.
Right,
but until you've got warranted confidence in your own taste, you aren't really doing this kind of pleasure at all. You aren't really making a judgment of taste at all. Mistake is the kind of mistake that Anscombe Shopper is making if she doesn't buy everything on the list.
So just a quick
the list is
comment
trying to
though,
get something else right.
quick follow-up comment on that. So I think you're departing from Hannes. And I think we must realize that fundamentally thinking of these as rules you can't formulate. She thinks, there aren't even rules. It's so basic for her that there is a notion of rightness which is prior to it, independent of rules altogether.
Well,
and I think you're suggesting.
Well, I mean, here I would want to say there certainly is that. That's something I would jump up on the tables to get straight if I were talking about Wittgenstein. But today I'm talking about Kant and in a kind of poker faces and exegetical spirit. And Kant, I think, really does want to think of this in terms of indeterminate concepts, indeterminate principles. I mean, which are beyond the power of their wielder to formulate.
Yeah.
I mean, and so, and so, and so the normativity Kant has in mind isn't by his own account as rootless as the sum of Kant's formulations.
Thank you. That's helpful.
Okay, Adam?
Yeah. Oh,
Oh, sorry, and then you, Alan.
all right.
Sorry, I promise you we'll get to you.
You're next.
Okay, hi. So I'm gonna ask a very crude questions. I don't know if there are things I'm not getting. I think it's my fault.
It's crude talks of
On
crude questions.
we ordinarily take it that some things are beautiful and others not. And we want the account to at least capture that. And so I wasn't sure why on your preferred reading we shouldn't think that any and all objects could be suited to elicit responses that play the kind of role we're trying to play.
I mean, I hope I asked a rhetorical question, not everything that's beautiful, is it in sufficiently open-minded way. But I don't myself see it as context. How can allow for everything to be beautiful because well, some engagements with the beautiful more concerned making discrimination from others. And I think experiences which are thoughts of comparison and thoughts of discrimination. Well, missing, but if you really believe the kind of functionalist account I'm seeing in Kant's text, I think you've got to treat the discriminatory moment as pretty important because it's by engaging in just the right ways with just the right objects that we're going to reap the allegedly needed core benefits. So I mean, there's a spectrum of phenomenologically available views about experience within it. In my own thinking, less discriminating direction, but it strikes me right now that Kant needs an account that is a fair amount of discriminating between more and less, and where you may not have to be as ranking things to at least one decimal places as Anthony Santana once in his favorite rock critic is, but there's going to have to be a fair amount of that if this functional
So maybe I was misled by the quotation at the very end of the seashell. So maybe you could just say something about how you understood that.
Well, the seashells. I take the seashells disposability as a matter, at least for the time being, it's done for me. And in that sense, the experience of can be pretty full and pretty complete, and the pleasure can fulfill itself without generating any lasting. Now, Kant actually thinks that for reasons of the interaction of the experience of being with social instincts and desires to make certain kinds of moral pay of natural appearances, that we will in fact be profoundly attached to both artifactual. But I think it highlights the features of this that I was trying to focus on, that Valerie could find this thing deeply fascinating, deeply suggestive, and still feel completely fluid. That's difficult to it isn't as if the burnout cigarette is the only thing I like in that quotation by any means, but I don't tolerate the rest. Or I would have been
Now, I want to ask a question I think is related to Gary's question. And then someone's just very basic question about how Kant conceives of a judgment of taste as a judgment. Judgments on Kant's account are supposed to go back and forth between universal concepts and particular instances. A determining judgment, you take a universal concept you have mastered, and you decide which particular things it applies to.
Yeah.
And a reflective judgment, you go from a bunch of individual instances or maybe a manifold, and you find the right concept to fit them. But the thing that a judgment of taste is supposed to do, it's supposed to be, involve a free play of imagination and understanding. And free, you ask free of what? Free of a concept. I think that's the answer to the question what free means.
Yeah.
And so how does judgment, if it has nothing to do with concepts, how can it?
Well, there are two things in the text.
Yeah.
And there are different possible ways of juggling. One is that couple of passages where he says that just as you expect the judgment of taste as the predicate of pleasure.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. So it's not a universal concept.
Yeah.
Feeling of pleasure.
Which leaves you with the question of how to predicate something that isn't universal, or how to make of this particular kind of pleasure a funny kind of universal. That's one.
That'll be one answer.
That's one set of texts. I mean, there are other sets of texts where he seems to be beginning to go. On which there are both determinate concepts and indeterminate and the idea of an indeterminate concept is one that gets fullest in the part of the text that has only one known lover. But I think the idea of indeterminate conception is naturally thought of as at work in the specification for ground of satisfaction in the third one. He's talking about a subjective form of propulsiveness, purpose, performance of the all these formulations related to each other, but on my rather unconventional reading, they come out being different ways of saying when we're trying to justify ourselves in our own eyes, we've got to be able to ask ourselves, what am I saying when I say to myself that this thing's beautiful? What am I saying? Well, putting some other pieces together. This thing is as if sent to give encouragement to the presumption that the world is as if made to our cognitive measure. See, by the way, like natural beauty has been sidetracked on this. What beauty is, because it can look more like a message something made by this disreputable guy on the street. So that's something we can think about because it's called we think about it and call it beautiful. But it's not a determinate concept with determinate criteria of application, because otherwise they can dispute about it. I mean, otherwise it could figure discursively in full range of ways that a discursive concept can and can't. So there are at least gestures in the direction of indeterminate, in some sense, subjective universals that can mix and mingle with the orthodox universals in pretty rich range of ways. I'm still trying to figure out how serious Kant needs to be about that, but there's certain gestures.
One little comment on this. I like your second solution better than the first. So the first fits some text better because pleasure doesn't look to me like a predicate. I mean, it doesn't look like a it doesn't look like a proper predicate of the judgment. Whereas you're suggesting something that at the end of the second one that well, it needs a lot more spelling out what you're suggesting.
Yeah.
And one way you might spell it out is push Kant in the direction of rationalist aesthetics. It is what it's really doing is anticipating the idea of perfection.
Well, it's going to be an awkward question for him if he goes in this direction. What's the difference between indeterminacy and confusion? I think there's some resources to exploit. Which story is delicate?
That's, I think we've proved, sorry, David, can we leave it to the dinner? I'm sorry, we're a little past time, but thank you so much for the talk. And let's